Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Christensen, President and CEO of the Alaska World Affairs Council and the Norwegian Honorary Consul for Alaska. It's such a pleasure to be here today to feature panelists joining us from Alaska, Norway, San Francisco, who will be speaking about cultivating Arctic entrepreneurship in a post-pandemic world. This program is in partnership with and part of the Alaska Startupweek. Fun fact, our moderator today, Bradley Pizzimenti, was actually the first entrepreneur we featured in this series 4 years ago. We were at the BP Energy Center, and here he is 4 years later and back by popular demand as our moderator. Another fun fact is it is 35 degrees Fahrenheit and forecast is for snow, both here and in Tromsø, Norway, our sister city, and where our speaker, Arlén Larsen, is from. So I hope you are cozy and warm wherever you are in the world. I'm sitting here with my Starbucks Norway cup having pumpkin spice tea, and it's a great morning here. Wherever you are in the world, please say hello to us in the chat feature. Tell us where you are. And if you have any problems, our technician guru, Siobhan Choi, will help you out. Today's program is part of the Evangeline Atwood Distinguished Speakers Series, and it's generously sponsored by the Norwegian Consulate General in San Francisco. Thank you so much. They are committed to supporting Arctic programming to increase all of our awareness in this area we both call home and where changes are seen both locally and globally. Thank you so much to the Norwegian Consulate General in San Francisco. We are, with the World Affairs Council, part of 95 councils around the United States. This network is hopefully in your part of the world. And here in Alaska, it's been here longer than Alaska's been a state. We welcome everyone here who's joining the conversation to join us in the Q&A after our conversation. If you're currently not a member, please do join. Please join to support this unfiltered, nonpartisan, non-political programs like the one we're seeing today, where you can directly hear from speakers and ask these global thinkers questions personally. We have a lot of fascinating programs. You saw them before our slide deck. You'll see them at the end again. Come to our website. One to highlight is our program this next Friday in person with Dr. Frank Von Hippel and Dr. Jim Muller. Fun fact, Frank Von Hippel went to East High School. We were both on the ski team. So ask a question about that, see how his ski skills are now that he's in Arizona. But he's flying back to Alaska for this program in person, and I hope you can join us. Also, WorldWiz on the 1st of December. This is our pub trivia night. It is a whole lot of fun. We're going to be coming together in our spaces and have a lot of fun for this fundraiser for the Alaska World Affairs Council. We also have Alaska airline tickets you can purchase now online or at the event. Buy a raffle ticket. It's a great deal. And during this time, as we're talking about snow, we're all thinking about warmer places like Hawaii and Belize and Costa Rica. I sound like an Alaska Airlines commercial, but there's no blackout dates, and it's a $2,500 value, so support the organization and buy a raffle ticket. With that, I would like to talk about our moderator for just 1 second before I turn over the microphone to him, the inspiring Bradley Pizzimenti, who himself is the founder and CEO of Turn Again Heavy Lift. And he got his start with computer hardware working for Sequence Systems. And during that time, it was acquired by IBM in 1999. He spent 2 years developing and teaching computer science in French in Burkina Faso during his Peace Corps service. During his second year of graduate school in Paris, he won an entrepreneur competition with friends at SciencePo and was given the chance to help grow a young startup from idea stage in Berlin in the summer of 2013. He then returned to his hometown of Portland, Oregon to start Jeniker Systems, a software consultancy, but then he relocated to Anchorage, Alaska in 2018. He's a commercial drone pilot and has conducted FAA Part 107 commercial drone pilot training around Alaska. With that, I'd like to hand the microphone over to Bradley Pizzimenti. Bradley.
Thank you, Lisa, for that very warm introduction. And thank you all for being here on this kind of drizzly winter morning, at least for us in Anchorage. And on that note, I want to acknowledge that the Alaska World Affairs Council and half of our panel this morning are coming to you from the traditional lands of the indigenous peoples of Alaska. And specifically here in Anchorage, we're on the territories of the Dena'ina Athabascans. We acknowledge the place-based knowledge of these peoples and are grateful for their ancestral and ongoing stewardship of these lands. So this panel, this discussion this morning for the next 55 minutes, we're going to try to finish on time, is going to be looking at how COVID has affected the two communities that are gathered here today, Norway and Alaska. And my hope is that we will take an examination of how this pandemic has made life more difficult for us, and also what tools have been tried or that we might like to try to assist small organizations in growing and helping the fabric of our society. So to explore that here today, I'm really excited to be joined by four panelists. We have Alexander Bergo, Maria Larsen, Kai Holland, and Jay Byam. And I think in the interest of time, I know that you all are going to want to speak for your own companies, so I will just go ahead and pass it over to, I'm not sure, Lisa, if we have Maria on yet. I think she's having some difficulties getting connected.
She is. We're working on it, so hopefully she'll be on soon.
All right. So then why don't we start with you, Alexander, if you want to tell us about who you are and what you're working on.
Hi, my name is Alex Bergo. I work for Innovation Norway here in San Francisco. Innovation Norway is a publicly owned organization that supports Norway's growth and export ambitions. We help sort of turn the Norwegian economy towards something more sustainable. We help entrepreneurs around the country in all areas of Norway build and grow businesses. We help with both funding and loans. We help with educational efforts, and we help connect businesses that wants to start exporting. I sit in San Francisco, but we have people in offices all around the world. So we can help businesses that are trying to do exports. We also help foreign companies that wants to go to Norway and build businesses and help them sort of what is available in terms of tax relief or how we can help them build their business in Norway. So I think the short of it is that I'm part of an organization that wants to create new taxpayers in Norway. So yeah, that's the short. I mean, my background myself is entrepreneurship and academia. I have a PhD in sort of a mix of business, communication, and computer science, focused a lot on machine learning. I also built my own company that I got funded, and most of my investors were from the Bay Area, so it was natural to move here. I started in Innovation Norway about 3 months ago, so I'm still fairly new to the organization.
Fantastic. Kai, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Kai Holland, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everyone this morning, and thanks, Bradley, for the opportunity for a short introduction. I'm one of the co-founders of an organization called Alaska Version 3. Alaska Version 3 began almost a year ago this month with the question of what's next, Alaska? It was a question that was really born out of the pandemic, as we were both struggling with the impacts of the pandemic, but also struggling with the understanding that our economy, our mature natural resource extraction-based economy, really had hit a maturity point. It was not going to be the economy of the future. It's not going to be the economy that would see the growth that the next generation of Alaskans might aspire to. And that question, what's next, Alaska, brought together a group of Alaskans that found that question and found the opportunity to explore how we would start changing the narrative of what Alaska could be in the future. An Alaska that would perhaps strengthen our original subsistence economy, recognizing the value of subsistence approaches to even creating better resiliency in our current communities, as well as examining how we could create more value for Alaska and Alaskans with our second economy, natural resource extraction, and then to grow on top of that a new economy that would recognize that Alaska's at a crossroads in climate change, energy transition, cultural equity challenges, and that those challenges and opportunities were ones that we could turn into new ventures, new value-added activities that would have global ramifications. The challenges that we face here in Alaska and the opportunities that we can create from them, we believe can help bring Alaska into a global position of leadership and opportunity for Alaskans. So we've created this organization. It's designed to engage Alaskans in this question of what's next and to explore the different ways that might manifest itself in terms of increasing the brain power in Alaska, increasing innovation entrepreneurship, increasing the quality places where we can meet in person and virtually, as well as helping develop a new narrative about what will become. So I'm really pleased to have been able to work with a wonderful group of Alaskans that want to engage in this work, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thanks, Bradley.
Thanks so much for being here, Kai, and I know that we'll dig into a lot of that deeper as well during the panel. Jay, tell us about yourself.
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks. Really glad to be here and excited to hear from the other panelists. And hopefully contribute something of value. But as for myself, I grew up in Delta Junction, Alaska, rural Alaska. Well, not that rural, it's still on the road system, but pretty small. Went to UAF for computer science, master's degree up there. And since then I've built my career around software development. So spent years as an augmented reality and virtual reality developer, worked on projects like that for Amazon and GE. I moved on from there into web development and then eventually into software consulting, specifically in oil and gas, all the while, staying in Alaska, making it happen here. About 2 years ago, set off on this adventure to build a company called Carta Solutions, which I lead now. We're a little software startup here in Anchorage, 100% Alaskan owned and operated. Essentially, we built a cloud platform that allows organizations to visualize their heavy industry assets, essentially creating a virtual copy of whatever operating environment they have for purposes of training and asset management and remote outage response and things like that. So our vision for it is to build up a customer base here in Alaska to prove ourselves as commercially viable to then launch into the broader market. So just excited essentially to build business here and have been really encouraged by the ecosystem that exists in such a relatively small state in a lot of ways. So glad to be here. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. So, I want to make sure that Maria, if she's able to join us, has a chance to intro, but I think this is probably great to just maybe keep this discussion going here. I'll toss out some questions here, and we absolutely do not have to stay on topic. I think that the general understanding of how all of these different ways of interacting in entrepreneurship in these two places probably is going to make itself known to us here. So first of all, I'd like to understand a little bit more from you, Alex. What is the relationship that I guess you most try to cultivate from your position in San Francisco with companies back in Norway? Could you speak to a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there are certain things that, like, if you look at cultural differences, especially from a non-English speaking country, but everybody speaks English in Norway. So we have a sense that the cultures are very similar. And they are in many respects, but there are certain differences that are nuances that really kind of changes when you get into a market like San Francisco, California, or the US in general. In Norway, the market is fairly small, and companies that come over needs to understand that the US is sort of 50 countries with different cultures, and you have to sort of tighten up your product, make sure that it fits the market that you're going into, and very often you have to come in. We're also very much looking for companies that we are calling like born global, that have the aspiration to go big. And I think that's one of the ideas that we try to imprint. So we run a few different programs over here. One is called Think, and it's about product market fit for companies, right? They might have sales already, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your product is perfect and ready to scale, right? So we try to help them sort of tighten up the product and the product offering, and then think big in terms of the US as a market, because it's a very different proposition, attaching yourself and attacking a market that is so much larger than the Norwegian one. So we have quite a few different things that we're trying to imprint in that. But I think having the sense of being born global is one of the largest ones. So the ability to think big.
Absolutely. I wonder, Jay, if you have any thoughts on that. I know that we've offline had another discussion about how does a software company scale, because certainly software does scale globally. Do you think about those things for your company?
I mean, certainly, and lose plenty of sleep around it. I mean, I think that depending on who you're talking to, they want to hear a certain answer from you. I guess what I mean specifically is when I'm speaking to, you know, a venture capital firm, to an investor, I'm asking for investment into my company. They want to hear that we have plans to scale, you know, extremely large, right? You know, times 10 in 5 years, all the quick numbers. But local angels have much more of a loyalty to Alaska. A really interesting difference here that what they want to hear actually is that you're taking a much slower community-based approach, that you're looking to bring about, you know, change in Alaska first, even if that is, you know, somewhat negative toward your broader global, I guess, next step plans. And so we at Carta are trying to strike a balance there, right? Where we're not walking away from and you know, turning away from our roots as an Alaskan company, because that loyalty with the ecosystem up here has been extremely beneficial to us. But we don't want to stop here either. And so trying to find that balance, I think, has been difficult for us, but has slowly come out of, you know, seeking the advice of plenty of the very knowledgeable people up here and elsewhere.
Interesting. And please, we're a small group, so okay, go ahead and chime in. I think we can talk over each other.
So I think this is really interesting, because it goes directly into one of the things that is a big focus in terms of the cultural shift, right? So what Jay is now talking about is understanding who you're selling to. And that is critical, right? Like if you're going towards a VC over here, they have a different business model. And so you have to kind of you have to adapt your sales to the person that you're talking to. And that's exactly what it is, right? The same difference exists in Norway. You have to be lean in how you raise money in Norway compared to over here, right? Like it's a different way. You have different instruments for fundraising in Norway than you might have here, right? Like here, the venture capital industry is sort of grown over 50 years. It's much newer in Norway. We have great venture capitalists in Norway too, but it's slightly a different culture. And it's about selling to, like, understanding the business model of the people you're selling to.
So Bradley, if I can try and pick up a couple of points here. One of the ways I like to characterize the entrepreneur ecosystem in Alaska is one that I view as having a little more bent towards practicality in terms of the kinds of solutions and startups we have here. And what, you know, I think has been, you know, suggested as a go slower area, I would, you know, characterize a little bit more in terms of the investors, and the ethos here has put a little more emphasis on traction and demonstrating, you know, real sustainability in a business model. And, you know, think we can be very proud of the, many of the kinds of startups we have here, like what CART is doing in terms of actually being a company looking at creating value within process industries and the tools that are there, or looking at 60 Hertz that's providing improved maintenance to rural communities that now is scaling out of Alaska to some of the manufacturing companies. We have, we've got software companies also, but we have a lot of companies here that have adapted kind of the Alaskan ethos of being, useful, practical, solving real problems. And I think that's one of the really great opportunities for Alaska in doing that. Now, just also tag on that I know from surveying investors in Alaska, as part of the Alaska Investor Network, and I do some angel investing. I'm a venture capital fund manager. I've spent time watching what's going on in this area, and the reality is most of Alaska's angel and venture capital investment is being placed out of state, because those investors do want scalable startups and they want the returns from it. Those that choose to invest in Alaska and the fewer number of opportunities here, they tend to be more connected with Alaska. They're doing it because they want to grow Alaska's economy, and they come from a background that's looking for real businesses, solving real problems, doing practical things, and they want to see a little more traction in that process. I have seen more of our startups that have gone a little slower to develop a little more solidity in their business plan, traction in their marketing, and wanting to then have better leverage when they do take investment on the terms that they can get for that investment in there. So I think there's something unique, and there's something I think good about our style of entrepreneurship and the kind of companies we're forming here.
Thank you for that. Yeah, now that we've kind of had that out here, I would love to layer on COVID in all of this in terms of how that has affected all of this for each of you. Maybe Alex, starting with you, has the pandemic drastically changed how you've operated, how you've interacted with these companies, or the resources that you use?
Yes and no. So I think a crisis always bring about change in some way, right? And I think what we're seeing is more activity in many ways. Norway added a lot of extra funding to our budget, so we added maybe about $300 to $400 million in grants and loan instruments that we were giving out. We've seen a tremendous movement in capital towards smaller and medium-sized businesses, also because kind of the spending habit has changed, right? So I think it brings about a lot of opportunities in all the sort of tragic part of COVID. The bad thing for us who sits in San Francisco is that we can't take companies over here as much, right? Like, it's been hard to travel. But if you look at sort of the investment culture, that's actually changed quite a bit too, right? It's gone from, there was about 2 months when there was very little sort of movement in VC spending and investments, but then suddenly accelerated. And 2020, it went up by, I can't remember exactly how many percent, but it broke new records. And 2021 is the same thing. It's like the number of exits, the number of payouts to the LPs or the funds that are then putting it back into funds. And so you see this tremendous movement of capital flowing into to startups. So there's like both good and bad in this, of course. But I think just so the short end of it is that there seems to be more movement in entrepreneurship and a lot more capital that are sort of moving into companies.
Yeah, Kai, I see the Startup Week logo in your background behind there, and I know that you and I met 3 years ago at a startup weekend, I think for the first time, and events like that have been fantastic for bringing community together in person. Obviously, that's not happening this year in a lot of places. So curious what you see, as where the ecosystem is pivoting, and what's happening as a result of COVID.
Sure. Well, I'd like to kind of frame this in two areas. One is picking up on Alex's comment about investment. One of the things that has been really transformative in the work I'm doing, and part of the genesis of the Alaska version 3 work, has been the, I think, stark lack of investment that our COVID pandemic response placed on innovation, entrepreneurship, and digital transformation. We really poured an amazing amount of money into the assumption that the pandemic was going to be short-lived. We just needed to be able to provide businesses a little bit of a bridge, payroll protection, a short little loan, and everything would get back to normal. And here we are a year and a half later, 2 years almost, and I think we're beginning to understand that idea that we can hold our breath long enough to not catch the bug and go back to normal isn't maybe going to play out at this point. And we're seeing at the same time this dramatic shifting in worker expectations and individual aspirations. The news in the paper this morning about the data that's showing Alaska created 26,000 new business licenses in the last year is stunning. And equally stunning is the statistic that over the last decade, startups in Alaska have consistently added about 5,000 jobs to our economy. These are businesses that are aged 5 years or younger, that those have accounted for 89% of the growth in the private sector. 89% of our growth has come from businesses that are less than 5 years old. So you're kind of bookended in terms of how did we respond publicly with this money to kind of prop up the existing economy, but what's really creating jobs? And this 26,000 number that we're just seeing in the news today, I think shows that despite having invested so heavily in kind of holding our breath, that entrepreneurs didn't hold their breath. They kept on running. And last year at Startup Weekend, we were examining the question of how is the pandemic affecting our startup ecosystem, the question you're asking today, a year ago. And what was so startlingly clear was that the pandemic was not slowing down the work of innovative people to create entrepreneurial ventures. They actually were pivoting into the challenges that they were seeing, finding opportunities. Take Inlet Towers and the restaurant there. Last year, they had their best year ever in the middle of the pandemic, while other restaurants were struggling and we were battling over masks and all the other things about hours and whatnot. They pivoted into it in order to create their best year ever. And there's a number of startups in Alaska that had amazing years. Not all of them did. And if anything, one of the underlying stories here is that our pandemic response really didn't do a lot for startups. Not only did we not put those grants in, like Alex was referring to, but most of the pandemic stimulus money was based upon your past expenses. Well, if you're a startup, you don't have past expenses. So how do you go in and qualify for money if you didn't have employees last year because you are starting up? So I think we kind of got it wrong. And I'll just finish up with one quick comment here. And that is, I think we're going to be spending time looking at your question, Bradley, for a long time. And we should, because I think this pandemic response and how we responded to it, both individually and locally, and in terms of our larger investment, is teaching us something tremendously important about our capacity and our strategies for dealing with climate change. The pandemic gave us something very specific, very tangible that we could address. Climate change is much harder. And I think we need to learn from the pandemic something. We need to learn a lot of things, but I think one of the most important things is to pivot into how will this prepare us to be a little more agile and a little more flexible in the strategies we use for the climate change work. Because if we can't deal with something very specific and poignant, like, am I going to, catch this bug? If we can't deal with that, how are we going to deal with something more existential? Like, are we going to be able to deal with climate change issues? So I think there's a really important area to examine here. We'll be doing this for decades.
I also want to sort of keep on pushing that same train. Like Kai here is I think startups are well set up for pivoting. It's part of our DNA, right? To make changes fast as we see the markets change. We have two great examples of this. One is actually an Arctic startup in Norway. They had a health app, and when the pandemic struck, they made some changes so they could be part of the vaccine solution. And suddenly it was a 2000% growth month over month. It was absolutely insane. Another one was a ticketing company. In March of, when the pandemic started, the bottom fell out. They lost all revenue. They changed it to an online platform for streaming video and ticket sales. And suddenly now they're raising $50 million. I mean, this is what the startups do. They see the problem, change and adapt, and then it's full on go. And I think what we have to do as sort of the governmental arm is also influence our politicians to make policies that takes innovation into account, so that we can, instead of like I was saying, like we're just paying the same old bills. It's because they maybe don't understand what an innovation economy is and how the new startups are set up to kind of adapt and change in a changing world.
Thank you both for calling that out. It's good to hear. It's good to hear that call to action, I think, for American society in particular to begin to get behind these companies. But even if they don't, we're going to keep going anyway. Jay, can you speak to that? I mean, as one of those companies that has had to keep going through it.
Sure. I mean, I see in the chat here, in every crisis, there is opportunity. I completely agree. And I think it really is a matter of perspective. The value, and we talk about this all the time, the only value that you are going to provide is if there's, a strong enough problem that you're addressing. And so when that problem is in everyone's face, I think it's much more obvious that there must be new valuable solutions that come forward. A few just maybe practical examples that have affected us. Certainly, we're a software company, so we're selling to people in heavy industry, who many of them are just now getting comfortable with their email. And something that we saw come out of the pandemic very quickly is that suddenly, every grumpy guy, could send me a Zoom link and figure out his audio settings, and because he was forced to, right, he advanced his technical knowledge. And I think just across the board, it opened up people's, minds and their eyes, I guess, to this idea that, maybe this, there is opportunity for technology in these older industries because it solves a problem immediately, when it's necessary. That's a tiny example, but I really have seen a shift in the conversations that we're having with, customers and potential customers around that because of the necessity for technology to solve the problem of, virtual working specifically. So that's been encouraging, I guess. Out of all the, unfortunate things that came about, there have certainly been pivots and there have certainly been advantages and opportunities.
Thank you for that. And I want to note we're about halfway through here, and to encourage members of the audience, there is a Q&A button in the Zoom, and you can put your questions in there. We have one here from Allison Kelly that sounds, maybe Kai can take this one on here. Looks like question is around how tiny investors might be able to invest in Alaska startups, especially those focusing on the practical solutions mentioned.
Thanks, Bradley. The first thing that just jumps to mind with Alice's question is to, recognize where the startups may have products and solutions that may be interesting to you. I'm sitting here wearing a pair of Pandera shoes. I have, Alpine Fit clothing that I've purchased. When I go out and get a coffee, I look for a Heather's Choice Packaroon. So, one of the best things that we can do is to, recognize these Alaskan startups and the wonderful products that they're creating, and to, buy their products or to help them find customers. I know I do some work with the G-Beta program as a mentor there and just helping those companies find some traction. In terms of the more specific question I think is being asked here about how do we actually invest in startups, first off, I want to say, just out of kind of, some, just kind of a heads up, investing in startups is a really risky thing to do financially. So I don't want to ever get into this discussion without saying, if you're a small investor, be really careful, thinking about startups being a way of making it rich quick. Startup investing is a very complex endeavor. It's one that really requires you being able to invest in a minimum of 10 to 15 different ventures in order to distribute your investment and to actually see a financial return. So with that said, though, I want to kind of go back to, if you're investing in because you want to see them successful, buy their products, help them find a new customer, give them some honest feedback about what they're doing. There are ways financially to participate through some of the crowdsourcing sites, like Babyvend, an Anchorage startup right now, has a WeFunder program going on where they're looking for crowdfunding investment there. There are some additional funding investment opportunities in Alaska through its Crowdfunding Act. And there are opportunities to put a little bit of money into any startup directly. In doing that, you're allowed to have a certain number of small investors within the cap table of an investment. But again, I want to go back to be really careful, this investing in startups. Best thing you can do is to support them, help them find an employee. If they're looking for an employee, help them gain some traction, give them some feedback. There's a lot we can do to strengthen it. But the Invest Local program that is being held right now is an amazing program, and I encourage you to read the work of Michael Schumann, who's developed a national reputation as talking about how people can invest locally and just how attractive local investment is.
Yeah, thanks for that. And it looks like we will not be able to be joined by Maria this morning. So I wonder, Alex, if you might sort of try to fill those shoes a little bit and, also tell us about, any of the Norwegian companies that you've worked with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have a ton of companies, and the movement in the market has been significant, right? So we've seen through especially the pandemic a lot of different problems being solved. Especially, I think the Nordic, the startups from north of Norway, they solve slightly different problems than maybe we see in the south. So we have one tech company, and they're producing really good technical and deep tech solutions for sustainability issues, but they have problems achieving growth because they can't hire more people. They can't find engineers. So they have, in that town, there's an unemployment level of 1.6%. And so they just can't find people. So if they want to expand, they have to move or set up businesses other places, or sort of import labor. And that, of course, increases cost quite a bit. So they struggle with kind of that sense. We've seen another, I talked to them just yesterday, Kenius. They're a machine learning platform that suggests resources when you write your article. So first and foremost, an ed tech platform. They got a mix of grants and funding from private sources, and they're building out a platform now, looking for more funding and getting out in the market. And so, and I think in some ways, the pandemic has given them a little bit of, calmness to actually develop one product. At the same time, I think they experience a lot of the same thing that Jay does, where now you can get on a Zoom call. You actually don't have to be person face-to-face to actually start selling your product. It's a lot more accepted by older industries now to be on a Zoom call or a Teams call and sell your product. And the same thing we see in kind of the venture capital arena is, back in the day, they would be, you have to be in the Bay Area to get an investment. Now they're looking out. They're doing most of their calls on Zoom. They now understand that going to a day-long pitch event where they might be interested in one company might not be the best spent time, right? They can actually now look at companies in Norway from the Bay Area or Alaska. So I think we got to be, like, as the smaller country or sort of a smaller ecosystem, we got to be bullish on what we have, because we're solving big problems too. But I think there's, I know that wasn't exactly answering the startup question, but there's so many thoughts about this, and I feel pretty bullish that we can offer something in the the Nordic countries and in Alaska that might not be available exactly here.
Yeah, and thank you for that kind of group. I think to get a sense of what the sense is of those companies. Just to pivot back to government for a second before we lose that thread. How, and this is something I really want to know, how has the Norwegian government taken on support of small enterprise during the pandemic? Has it been similar to the US? Has it been drastically different?
I think it's been very similar to the US in terms of sort of I think the US did a few things that were a little bit better, in terms of the payment protection plan, but it's still also supporting industries based on their old sort of business models, right? And what their revenue was before. We've been sort of the arm that helps the startup scene more. And we did get quite a lot of extra funding to support tech companies, especially. And so the velocity of payouts from us in terms of loans and grants have been significant. And so I think they've been trying to do the good thing, but I think also it happened so fast that it's hard to get a good strategy for sort of being very pinpointed in the solution, right? So it's been sort of a generic throw money at the problem kind of solution too. But I do think that at least our organization has been very conscientious that when the customers disappear, we have to step in at this point of time, right? In normal times, that's basically just proving that your company shouldn't survive as much. But in the pandemic, it changes a little bit. So
very interesting. So have there been direct government grants to ecosystems there, or to collections of companies or accelerators, or has it largely, like, I guess I'm curious if government support over the last year has changed, or if it really has been what it was before the pandemic.
I think it's very much, like, from our perspective, much of the same, but just more, right? So we do support clusters and building clusters because these are small companies that can't sort of fight the Enrons of the world, right? But as a group of companies that offer a wider product portfolio, it's something that we support as a cluster. There are also, I mean, I've seen some super innovative ways of going about building sustainable solutions that we've supported. But I do think that those solutions would have been supported in normal days too, right? So I think it's just more people accessible to be innovators has happened. So there's more companies coming out. And I think kind of the outside of our organization, I think the COVID support has gone more to traditional industries, but we are the one that supports sort of the ecosystem, the clusters, the accelerators a little bit, but we also do that outside. So it's like just kind of the same, but more.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear. Sounds like similar challenges around the globe. We have a question here from Paul Dunscombe around Arctic entrepreneurship. He says seems somewhat niche by its nature, but also seems to provide opportunities for innovation which can be applied beyond the Arctic. I know you talk a lot about that, Kai. Is that your way of looking at it?
Thanks for the opportunity to respond to that, and Paul, for your question. I would like to propose a little reframing on that, because I do think that it's easy for us to look at Alaska's and our Arctic positions set of problems and ventures as a niche, as you're suggesting. But I'd like to suggest that, for the most part, what we're working on here are problems that have global impact. And while our markets may seem small and the solutions unique, they have incredible opportunity. Take a 60 Hertz, for example, that started off trying to provide a solution for support of local microgrid infrastructure that started in Alaska. Well, it turns out that in the 5 or 6 years since they've launched, the world has recognized the value of microgrid type structures, hospital campuses, university campuses, governmental buildings, all are now seeing themselves structured as a microgrid so that they have the resilience when necessary to isolate themselves in that area. The power requirements in Africa, down in Colombia, South America, are all using their resources. Singapore right now is got another challenge. They're looking at water technologies, and across Alaska we have tremendous resources and knowledge around the efficient management of water and water resources. The energy transitions that we're dealing with in Alaska of trying to help remote villages transition off of diesel fueled alternative energy are solutions and very technical challenges of how do you integrate wind power, solar power, perhaps standby spinning power, and harmonize those so that they hand off cleanly. Those solutions end up having global value to what's going on. So the way I would characterize Alaska is not necessarily as a niche market, but a really amazing isolated market where you can come in here, you can develop a business, you can kind of do it off the radar screen to a certain degree, because you can go a lot further in this market to develop something before you're kind of getting too much visibility. But also companies like Jay's, if they want to call up and talk to the president of one of the oil and gas companies here, we can arrange that in this small little market up here. So entrepreneurs here have amazing access because it is a small isolated market in that area. So I think all the problems were, the challenges that we face in this state, while they have small markets here, they're part of incredibly large global markets. And I think we're a wonderful starting point. Two companies or two innovation hubs, Launch Alaska and HealthTie, both are finding tremendous success in being able to help startups from around the world be able to see pilot project opportunities in Alaska where they can have that intimate, direct contact with a customer and to test products and get the traction that they need to be able to get the momentum that they are requiring for investment and going global with that. So I think we're an amazing stepping stone. And rather than a niche market, I think we're a seed market where you can start off and grow that business and then from there jump off into greater things.
Yeah, I'm trying to not take off my moderator hat and be a co-panelist, but speaking also as a young Alaska business, I think being on the periphery is sometimes a feature, not a bug. And many folks up here who have found ways to effectively offer what people can get, in the lower 48 from, major cities very easily, can't quite be duplicated up here. And so it gives opportunities to come up with new ways of doing things.
Yeah, I just got to, one quick thing. I'm just laughing here because Alex was mentioning a few minutes ago about how the Norway folks view their market as so small. And I'm thinking, you want to talk small, Alaska really is a small place. And I think this idea of not letting the size of the market you're starting in become a mindset barrier to what you can create is really vital. I was in Serbia for a couple months earlier, and they saw themselves as small and with a tiny little market. And I said, look at what market you have. If you take the distance from Anchorage to Seattle and draw that radius around Belgrade, tell me what small really is. So it's a state, as somebody said in the chat here, it's a state of mind. We have to create an opportunity mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. And there's an amazing opportunity, even in these small markets, to be able to develop something and then move with more traction, more confidence, and having fine-tuned the search process into execution that can go global.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And born global doesn't mean that you go global day one. It means that, you start in your market and you start, tightening up your product and you start selling there, but then you're ready to go on and grow beyond sort of the borders.
Absolutely. How has that worked in your planning, Jay? When you think about when Carta goes beyond Alaska, do you look to the lower 48? Do you look to other countries? How does that work for you?
Yeah, no, I first just I was just vigorously nodding everything you said, Kai. I really appreciate you articulating it so well, because we don't see it as a disadvantage, that the I guess take pilot projects, for example, the kinds of projects that you can bring about are smaller up here, but they are not different in kind, right? So if you can get it right for some tiny municipality in Alaska, you can then prove out your solution. And then part of our, before I leave that, another big advantage Kai mentioned as well. I am 2 introductions away from literally anyone that I want to talk to, and the community up here has been so just impressively, just eagerly desiring, I guess, to, if I just mention real quickly what I'm up to, never met a person before, just say so-and-so said to try to reach out to you. I've been just astounded by the amount of people that want to connect me with potential opportunities. And so out of that, our plan is, to build out several sort of pilot-sized small commercial implementations in the different sectors that we're pursuing. So oil and gas and energy and municipalities, essentially to have an example to point back to when we go out into the larger markets, and say, look how well it worked up there in those crazy harsh conditions with all those, supply chain issues. Of course it'll work, for you. It's a scalable solution. And I think that there are many opportunities, and agree that it should be viewed as an opportunity and less as, exceptionalism, I suppose.
I think also it's an advantage being able to develop in isolation, right? So you're not actually in the market where people start looking at your product super early and start kind of trying to replicate or get the idea of it. So you actually can move your product forward really far before it becomes sort of a big impact thing.
Sure.
So, and I also think that there's other advantages, because the harsh environments that, I love winters. It's not harsh, but it's cold harsh, right? But that gives another perspective. Let's say like autonomous driving. We have companies that are solving for autonomous driving things that you just can't see much in California. You have to be like high up in Tahoe on very specific days, where that is 6 months in Norway, right? Like where they can solve for problems that aren't really a problem here. And I think that's also something that you can sort of be part of a solution, plugging in innovative thinking in an environment that is different, right? And then plug it into sort of the general solution as well.
I have to give a quick shout out to one of my favorite Alaska startups, Anchorage Greens, which runs a warehouse of hydroponic grown produce. And when I asked Trevor, who started it, what his energy costs were like for doing that, they're actually lower in the winter than they are in the summer. But it's all pretty stable and static. And he has a wait list of 80 people that want to subscribe to show up each week and have him fill a bin right in South Anchorage. So there's so many innovative solutions. And I guess a question I'd like to put to the three of you is, what more can specifically government be doing in these places to help these young companies that are dealing with a changing world advance and grow and scale?
I'll jump in with just a key thing, which is, the role of government in funding early stage research, pilot projects, and the really high risk exploration function is without question absolutely essential. SBIR type of fundings, university funding. Here in Alaska, we need a better infusion of some early stage money to fill the funnel with more young startups that are exploring ideas. We have a lot of the capacity to take them as they move forward. There are some funding gaps midstream there, but we right now have a huge gap right now in that first earliest stage set of activities and funds for companies to start. So things like the Accelerator Fund that's now fully deployed needs to be reestablished. The Alaska Seed Fund that's not been run for the last couple of years. We've got to put some money back into the very earliest stages of allowing companies to have a little bit of money to do that first MVP prototype, to be able to do a little bit of customer discovery. There are good programs here. I'm not saying there's nothing, but if I could do one thing right now, I was advocating that 1% of our pandemic response money should have gone into innovation, entrepreneurship, digital transformation, pilot projects, and helping lift up the challenges that matter in this state, and to help people engage in those challenges and develop solutions to those challenges. As it was, I couldn't even get 1% in there, but that's what we need. Is we need an allocation that goes into that early stage work for students and innovators, folks like Jay, to be able to explore their ideas, get some traction on a new solution.
Yeah, I mean, that is literally what our organization is made for. So this is one thing that Norway has done fairly well. I mean, this is an organization that developed over many years, but today we have kind of an entrepreneurial journey, and we can help you from before, like from the idea stage through actually building the company. You don't get everything from us, right? You have to put up work, you have to put up funding from other sources. It's a mix of loans and grants, but it is from the idea stage. And I do think it's exactly that. It's important for people to be able to sort of bootstrap this, because it doesn't do it on its own. And I do think that's one thing I've seen in the US is very sort of locally based in terms of the initiatives for the bootstrapping part to happen, right? So the company I started was or one of the companies I've started was in Hawaii, which I'm thinking, I don't know too much about the Alaskan economy, but I'm thinking it's isolated. It's a much smaller economy than California. The entrepreneurial mindset is there, but it wasn't as well sort of pushed out in society yet. And so the MVP we had to make on our own, and it's a little bit harder to get started that way. So I was just lucky because I was used to being poor student when I started my company, so I didn't mind, right? But the thing is that the average successful entrepreneur, it's not his first journey. It's not somebody who quit university at 20 and built it in a garage. The average successful entrepreneur is towards his 50s or her 50s. It's not their first journey. It's maybe the third startup. And so this is something that we have to sort of build into our system, that just because that idea doesn't succeed, it means that you should try it again. And then we have to build up systems that actually work for that kind of mindset.
I think those might be our great closing words. Before I pass back to Lisa, I know it's a working morning for many folks, so I want to make sure we finish on time. But I want to thank the three of you so much for joining us here this morning. I have notes here on my desk of some amazing ideas, so thank you for sharing your perspective and your thoughts here.
Thank you, Bradley and Jay and Kai and Alexander, so much for all of these great ideas and thoughts. And I just love the opportunity to be able to bring folks from different parts of the world to talk about some of the things we have in common and to learn from each other. And I sure learned a lot today. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us here today at the Alaska World Affairs Council, and for supporting our commitment to bringing quality education programs to you and our passion to increase all of our global competency. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them our way. Oh my, hello, Maria just got through to us. We were just wrapping up. It's actually 2 minutes before the hour. If there's something you'd like to add in 2 minutes, we would love to hear about your company in Norway.
Absolutely, perfect. So we are a startup started 5 years ago, Liveness. And are we logging on in 2 minutes, or are we wrapping up?
We're wrapping up, right? But we've been looking forward to hearing about Liveness and what you do. If you could just briefly just give us a teaser so we can go and find out more information about your company at another date.
Absolutely. So Liveness is a cloud-based platform that helps healthcare professionals and clinics to reduce obesity in the country. So As you know, I'm a medical doctor and I've been working with obesity for 15 years, and it's super difficult to actually get results in the patients. They lose motivation in the treatment, and also it's really difficult to actually gain the results. So that's why we have made LifeNess, which is a cloud-based system, which now shows that it's 5 times more weight loss after 6 months. So it's very promising results so far.
And is this somebody that anybody can do from all around the world?
Absolutely. So for a healthcare professional, you have the web-based platform, and for the patients, it's the app. So you can be connected to anywhere. And here in Northern Norway, in the Arctic, it's a big problem with distance and also weather that can stop patients from coming to the clinic. So this is also reducing the travel time for the patients. And it also, of course, makes it a lot easier and a seamless treatment.
Thank you, Maria. I look forward to looking more in depth into this. This is something that we're all coming to realize, especially with COVID, that the weight is definitely a tricky thing, and how to manage that and how to make change is also very tricky. So I look forward to looking into what you have to offer, and we'll put it up on our website so people can get a link to LifeNess. So thank you everyone for joining us here again today. We hope to see you all again soon. Please go to our website at alaskaworldaffairs.org for more information on upcoming programs. We're going to be in person next Friday with Dr. Frank Von Hippel. So I hope to see everyone soon. Thank you again so much, Bradley, Kai, Alexander, Jay, and Maria. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.